Are you able to explain? I mean, I can imagine when you say cam overlap, I can imagine that idle, which is, of course, the idle sound that I always want in any powerful car. But can you explain to the audience what cam overlap is?
Well, let's start from the beginnings. And with the Hemis, in order to get the horsepower that they were looking for, you had to have big valves. And so you had you had a, I owned a Triumph Spitfire at the time, and you could have fit 4 of the Triumph Spitfire intake valves in the area that was consumed by one Hemi intake valve, almost. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but they had to have huge amount of valve opening to get enough fuel and air into the engine to begin with. Okay, that's number one. And so then you're faced with the problem of getting all that stuff to mix, all right? And the more the valve's opening, the harder it is to get all that stuff through there and to get it to mix properly as well. So that's the next issue. Then when I talk about the camshaft, you want to keep those valves open for as long as possible. So you have really steep profiles on the cam, opening the valves early, shutting them late, and just to get the horsepower into those engines. And so all of that is not good for what you would call overall smooth drivability of an engine. And that's what you were dealing with. And you had big 4-barrel carburetors, and you didn't have great control over them. When you opened those secondaries, it dumped a ton of fuel into that manifold. And then you were charged with having to get that air and that fuel mixed in such a way that you could get it into the cylinders and mixed and burned and making the horsepower. So the cams, because of the type of openings and closings you had, I go back to what I said. The overlap made it idle very roughly, and it was trying to burn efficiently at a time when it was opening too much and closing too late. But when the engine started pulling up RPMs, then you needed to have those valves opening because the timing was the same for how long it took to open and close because of the cam profile. You couldn't vary that. So at higher RPMs, you had a lot less time, really, for the air and the fuel to get in. So you just had to compromise the lower end performance of those engines to make them run well at the top end. And I mean, if you raced a Hemi, you probably would have put a different cam in that was even more extreme, which you would have gotten out of the factory.
Right. So it would even be more of a drivability problem or more of an idling problem, et cetera. But the idea for the audience is with a cam, I mean, if you're interested in this little piece about cams, is that we can gear a cam for very smooth idle, very efficient, or heavier acceleration, heavier torque. Nowadays, they have things like a variable rate cam where it's actually turning and adjusting so that it can idle and not run out of breath at the top of RPM either. Did I word that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
This has been Jeff Stearns, Connected Through Cars.